User input. In this video, we will learn how to include user input in our Java programs. During the Python unit, we defined user input as information given to a program by a user of that program. Whenever we intend to include user input in our program, the first step is to type this line at the top of our program: import java.util.scanner. The import keyword is what gives us access to code and variable types that are not available by default. Without this line, we would not be able to access the tools necessary to include user input in our program. Java.util is the name of the package that contains this tool that we need to include user input. And scanner is the variable type that we're going to need to use in our program in order to be able to include user input. And then, of course, at the end is a semicolon, since this is a statement, and we always need semicolons at the end of our statements. Now that that line is complete, we can now begin writing our program, with the usual public class, my class, and the start of our main method. Now that we're in our main method, the first step is to create the scanner object. Now, the most important part of this line that we need to know is the left side of the assignment operator. As mentioned in an earlier video, whenever creating a variable in Java, you must first type the variable type, then the name. Scanner is the variable type that we're creating. Input is the name we're choosing to give it for this program. Then, on the right side of the assignment operator is a method of creating variables that we haven't discussed yet, but we will discuss in a later unit. For now, don't worry about the specific meaning of this part of the statement. Just know that whenever we are creating a scanner object, we need to have this part on the right side. Now, also recall from the Python unit that the 3 steps to basic user input is 1. Ask the user a question. 2. Wait for the user to type a response and press enter. Then store the user's response in a variable. Now, in Python, the input method was capable of both asking the user a question and waiting for the response. The scanner object doesn't have that capability. The scanner object is only able to wait for the user's response. So, our first step would be to print the question by using a simple system.out.print statement. Then, we'll use the scanner class's next method to wait for the user's response. By typing input.next, next will wait for the user to type a response, then press enter. That response will then get inputted to the program as a string type, which we can then store inside of a string variable, which we do. We store inside a string variable called name. Now, recall from our Python unit that there were times where we didn't want the user's response to be stored as a string. Sometimes we wanted it to be stored as an integer, or a float, or a boolean. Fortunately, the scanner class provides a simple way to accomplish each of these tasks. For example, suppose I want to know the user's age and I want to store it as an int. Instead of using the next method, I will use the nextInt method. I would call input.nextInt, then store the response inside an integer. Now, if I use the nextInt method, then the user's response must be a whole number. If the user types anything other than a whole number, this will cause your program to crash. Similarly, suppose I want to know the user's weight, and I want to store it as a double. In that case, I would use input.nextDouble. This method will then wait for the user to type a double value, and then it'll then store that response inside a double variable. Once again, since I'm using the nextDouble method, the user's response must be of type double. If the user enters a string or a boolean, then it'll be a type mismatch, it'll crash our program. And likewise, suppose I want to know if the user is a teenager or not, and I want the user to respond by typing true or false. Well, in that case, instead of using the next method, I will use the next boolean method. And then that response can then get stored inside a boolean variable. Of course, in this part, for the method to work, the user must type either true or false. Case doesn't matter. Uppercase, lowercase, doesn't matter. Just as long as the user types true or false, next boolean will handle converting it to the proper case. Any other input will result in a type error, which will crash your program.